From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Cole on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Cole on Congress. Today I'm pleased to welcome my very good friend, Congresswoman Candice Miller, to the program. Candice represents Michigan's 10th Congressional District and has done so since 2003. We were elected together in 2002. She chairs the Committee on House Administration, serves as Vice Chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security, as well as Chairman of the Homeland Security Subcommittee on Border and Maritime Security, and she's also a member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. And I can't tell you how happy I am to have you here. We have viewers and listeners, and let me just start off. Candice and I go way back, long before Congress. I first had
the careful.
Oh, it's all good stuff. Yeah, it's all good stuff. Come on.
You're dating us here.
Yeah, well, I met you when you were 6, but I was around 40.
Yeah.
But Candice was a very significant local official in Michigan, and she came up to help our mutual good friend Spencer Abraham, who was running for Republican National Committee chairman in his campaign in St. Louis in January of, that would have been 1993.
Oh, wow.
I was his executive director, so obviously I was working for him as well. We weren't successful, although he ended up in the Senate 2 years later, so
right.
He was kind of a lucky guy.
Then was the Secretary of Energy.
Secretary had a wonderful career.
Yeah.
So I first met Candice then, and then as fate would have it, we were both Secretaries of State together, beginning in 1995. She was elected statewide. I got there the easy way. Keating appointed me, and then we ended up in Congress together. And so I've had the chance to watch her as a public official and a political leader in a variety of circumstances. And I have to tell you, my friend, I just think you're the best. Now, my nickname for you is the Blonde Bomber, because I think you are the toughest on the floor. You're one of our best communicators, one of our most forceful leaders. And now watching you as a chairman of the Administration Committee, which is one of those committees that a lot of people don't know a lot about, but is absolutely integral to the working of the House. So since you've just risen to this august position, let me start there. I want to ask you what it's like, and if you would, again, our viewers and listeners won't know a lot about this committee, so if you can give them a quick overview and sort of the things you're working on.
Sure, absolutely, Tom, and I'm so delighted to join with you. I've watched you as well in all the various careers that you've had, and you just have a great well of respect and support, certainly here on Capitol Hill, from both Republicans and Democrats, which can't be said about every member of Congress right now when you have all this polarization happening in our country. I think both sides look to you as a leader on so many various issues, and a straight shooter, and that's as important as anything in this day and age, that's for sure. But the House Administration Committee has been, I think, a sort of a good fit for me. As you mentioned, some of my background, really all of my jobs have been really administrative in nature before I came to Congress. This is the first legislative job I've had. So really the House administration is a good fit with my skill sets, I think. And so that committee has jurisdiction over sort of the campus, I guess, if you will, the Capitol, all the House office buildings, the various, we set the authorization level for the budgets for all the committees. We have, everything on the mall is under our jurisdiction, whether that's most of the monuments, the Smithsonian, the Botanical Gardens, the Library of Congress, even the security on the campus with the Capitol Police, et cetera. So a lot of various kinds of things that are there. Now, one of the most critical components, I think, of the responsibilities in the jurisdiction of that committee, which is something that really sparked my interest when I started thinking that I might be able to get this particular appointment, is that it has jurisdiction over all of the election issues. And as former secretaries of state, both you and I, a former chief elections officer of my state, your state, there's so many things that are happening in the elections world, so to speak, whether it's oversight over some of the things the FEC is doing, campaign finance, a lot of talk about whether or not the federal government should get involved in a lot more with the election process, which I am, and I think you are big 10th Amendment people.
I am. I trust the states.
I trust the states as well. In fact, the president in his recent State of the Union just put together this another commission to look at long lines that happened in some of the states. And, I appreciate the interest. On the other hand, look, what happened in sort of the usual suspects, a couple of states that had the long lines. They didn't happen in Oklahoma. No. They didn't happen in Michigan. And so we don't want to be caught up in some more federal mandates that would negatively impact our ability in our states to run the elections the way that we want to. And, for instance, Florida, where they had the long lines, what happened there is exactly what should happen. The governor saw a problem, asked his Secretary of State to go explore what happened, make recommendations in a report. Now they're solving the problems. Federal government, we've got plenty on our plate. Those are things for the state, I think. But anyway, it's an interesting time to have this chairmanship.
Well, I tell you what, it is, again, it's absolutely integral to how this whole place operates. And if it's not administered efficiently, it doesn't legislate effectively, quite frankly. It's almost a precondition for everything else to work, and I just couldn't be more delighted that you're there. Now, I've got a set of questions, but I'm going to pull you off a little bit, and because we recently had a very unusual conference with the President of the United States, who came to talk to the Republican conference, and you asked actually one of the questions there, and so I'd like to, if you would, talk about the question you asked. I thought it was actually a very important question. It's one of those things that is symbolically significant, and also just get your take. We haven't had a chance to visit since then. How you think the president did, how you think the conference did. What did you take away from the meeting?
Well, first of all, many people have characterized the president, really his recent outreach, as a sort of his charm offensive, and I would agree with that, and I think it's been successful. I think the president has been totally charmed by the Republican House.
That's a novel interpretation. I love that.
As I said when I got an opportunity to ask the question to him, I said, Mr. President, don't be a stranger. Please come back. And I think we really sincerely mean that. We want to have an open line of communication with the president. And I said, please don't believe all these terrible things that are said about us all. We're nice people. We're here. We're elected. We want to work with you. But I did ask him a question in a very respectful tone. But as you mentioned, it's something I think is symbolic. And I said, Mr. President, with the sequestration, everybody's talking about the impacts of what has happened. I mean, in the House alone, all of our individual budgets have been cut 5%, then 6%, then 8%. And I know nobody has any sympathy for members of Congress, but I point that out. As that is happening, we are not talking about closing the Capitol building or the Capitol Visitor Center or any of these beautiful House office buildings, which belong to the people. Tom, you and I are just passing through.
Absolutely right.
These buildings belong to the people of America. And so I asked the president, in a respectful tone, with this new decision to close the White House to tours, I just think symbolically, what could be worse than that?
Well, you also offered to give some things up, to help him in a budgetary sense, which I thought about that, and I thought, you're absolutely right. Well, we don't need a congressional Christmas party. We know that costs a lot of money. We don't need a congressional picnic. That costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
Shut down some of those things and inconvenience the politicians. Don't inconvenience people that coming to Washington, D.C., particularly if you're bringing your kids, might be a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
It is.
For a family, and they need to have every opportunity to enjoy what, after all, they pay for.
Yes.
And what their forebears built, and that they want to, and what they want to, pass on to their kids and grandkids.
It's really true. And so, as you mentioned, I said, we don't need to be having some of these events that you've got members of Congress over there. Forget it. Take the money out of our budget or our hide, and really open up the doors to America. Because you know what? We're an open society. We are an inclusive society here, and we cannot be closing the doors to the people's house. The symbolism of that, it's maybe not the most pressing issue, but it's just something that is bothering us.
And it leads to suspicion, I think, on our part that, look, he's doing this for show because we've made some tough decisions in terms of cutting government spending. We all know that needs to be done. But again, we're talking about this current round of cuts, 2.4% of a $3.5 trillion budget. We can do this. We could spread it out differently. And nobody would ever want the president to be at any risk at all. But the Capitol is also a terrorist target, probably the bigger terrorist target. We get very good security. I'm sure the president will always get good security, as he should. So I don't believe, I'm skeptical that the Secret Service, says, well, we have to cut back on this. Again, we'll work with the president and keep the White House open for the American people.
Yeah, I think it's very important. And all these children, as you say, they're coming to Washington, D.C. with their school groups and everything else, or even if they're just here on the weekends with their parents or whatever. The White House is the people's house, needs to be open. So I hope the president does reconsider that.
You were kind enough to say that I can work across the aisle with our Democratic friends and counterparts. You can too, and you represent actually one of the most contested and historically competitive swing areas in the country. How does that shape the way you view politics?
Well, I come out of a county in Michigan called Macomb County, which sometimes you'll hear in the political nomenclature this term, the Reagan Democrats, and that term had its genesis in my county. So, this is a very blue-collar auto factory county, etc. And we're not the glitziest place in the world, but I'll tell you one thing we know how to do. We get up and work hard all day, every day, 24/7. We're very family values, very community-oriented. I've heard that our charitable giving is as high per capita as anywhere in the country, certainly. That's the kind of community that I am very proud to represent. But, sometimes we're not sure exactly how partisan we are, and all the experts come in during the election time. We feel like we're in a petri dish or something. They're trying to figure out which way we're going to be voting, because we do swing back and forth. So, I consider myself to be a conservative Republican. I'm very fiscally conservative. I came of age politically during Ronald Reagan's time. And on the other hand, I also think that, and I believe generally, less government is better, less government regulations, less taxation, all of these things. But I also am not so anti-government that I don't think government has any role to play anywhere. And that's where I think we have to think about transparency, efficiency, cost effectiveness. Obviously, the first and foremost responsibility of the federal government is to provide for the common defense. That is in the preamble of our Constitution, national defense, homeland security, these kinds of things. But then even from a transportation standpoint, every local township or city is not going to build an interstate. Some things the government must do, and they need to do it well, and they need to do it efficiently. But I think as we've seen what's happened, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, where we're running these $1.5 trillion deficits every single year, $16 trillion in debt. Look, we have got to get our fiscal house in order, and whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a Green Party or independent or whatever you are, I think most of us think that, look, we have to have the political will to make the decisions. I'll tell you what, I'm not looking at my 2 granddaughters and saying, well, look, I don't have the political will, so would you mind paying the bill? I'm not there.
Well, it's that kind of common sense that lets you pick up what was a Democratic seat. You were a gain for us. That was historically Democratic country, and hold it, because it has been carried by presidential candidates of both parties during your tenure. So yes, this is tough ground for Republicans. This is not one of those kind of red districts out there, and I think it's just one of the many things that makes you so valuable for this conference, is that you represent a really important slice of real America that either party can win on any given election cycle. It makes you a voice of reason. Let me ask you this. You have been, of course, on the committee for Homeland Security, a very important committee, and are probably one of the foremost experts in the Congress on securing our border and looking at the immigration issues. How are we doing, and what are the things that we ought to be doing going forward to do a better job in both those areas?
Well, that's another one of our constitutional responsibilities, of course, is to make sure that we do secure our borders. And we've not done the best of all jobs, whether it was this president or the previous president. Again, this is really not a partisan issue. We need to be about the business of securing our border. And I think as we go forward as a Congress with this entire debate now about having a step forward immigration reform, I think all of us would agree that the immigration programs and laws that we have in our nation need some reform. And I think something will happen this year. But a very important part of that is that the American citizens in the Congress feel a high degree of confidence or comfort that we are, if not a complete secure border, we're well on the path to securing our border as we move on some of these things, perhaps on a parallel track. It's interesting because as we think about always a border security on the southwest border. We have other borders. You know, they've said we have operational control, sort of a buzz term there, on the southwest border in the 40 percentile. On the northern border, it's in the one-digit numerals. And then, of course, we have our coastal borders as well, and we think about all of the supply chain, the container ships coming into our ports of entry, et cetera. So it's a very complicated situation. I think a layered approach is having an impact, whether it's boots on the ground with CBP, with the National Guard that helped a bit along the southern border, miles of fence that have already been erected. We're about 700 miles of fencing that have gone up in various things. Really using new technologies, whether that's unmanned aerial vehicles, the UAVs that were so successful in theater, now have an impact certainly on border security. So there's a lot of various things that are happening along the border, but we've done a lot. But we have a long way to go. And one thing that I always remind people, they think, well, geez, the border, so if you're a border state, you're really concerned about that. Well, if we're in the middle of the country, maybe we don't have to worry about it so much. Anyone that has an international airport, which is every state, is a border state. And I say that because in the 40 percentile, almost half of all the illegal aliens that are in our country didn't come across the desert in the middle of the night. They are here on visa overstays. They came through our airports and they stayed here. And so we have really helped a lot, I think, and the Department of Homeland Security has really taken a focus on this as we have oversighted and pushed them toward it, of having a very robust entrance and then exit system with our visas. And where they had several 100,000 of a backlog, they've gotten that down to a pretty minimum amount now. And remember the 9/11 hijackers, many of them were here on visa overstays. So it's a different part of it all.
Yeah, again, it's you're quite right. It's a part that people don't think about a lot. Well, let me ask you another question on another committee you're on. I don't know anybody in America that's not interested in transportation and infrastructure. You know, we all travel on roads. We all know how important our ports and our rail system and our air traffic control systems are. So what are you know, as a longtime member of that committee, where do you see as the major problems, and what sort of initiatives should the country be undertaking to solve them?
One thing we always have to remember as Americans, our country, and really the world throughout history, the economics has always followed the transportation grid. And in our country, it was the wagon trains going out to the west, right? And then the railroads went, going through Oklahoma and other places, right?
Some of my people weren't so happy about those wagon trains and railroads.
Yes, that's right. That is true. But the economics followed it.
Yeah, oh, it certainly did.
Yeah, it did. And as they say, the interstates then came, and then now the aviation links are so important. Shipping, a critical part. So how we move, how we transit things, that is all under the jurisdiction of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. And so many of our global competitors are eating our lunch, really, when it comes to the amount of investment they are making in their infrastructure and what we're doing here in America. So that's really the challenge for us on our committee now. You know, we all know we need to put more investment in our infrastructure, but we have this fiscal crisis, and so how are we going to pay? And at the same time, you have a situation, which I know this very well, coming from the auto capital of the world, really, in Michigan, where, you know, we're always wanting to have more fuel-efficient cars and all of these kinds of things. But, you know, if you buy a Chevy Volt, that might be great for you. You're plugging your car and you're not having to buy so much gasoline, but your car is still wear and tear on the highways, but yet you're not paying the gas tax. So who's paying for it, right? So how can we develop a system? Is a gas tax an antiquated system? Is there a way that we can think about how we make sure the users pay, that we have adequate resources to invest in our infrastructure? And so it really is an interesting debate right now when we are on the verge of having another reauthorization of a transportation bill. So that's some of the things we're looking at. We're also looking at some of the things that people don't think about so much because you don't see them all the time, and that's underground infrastructure, which is a critical component for environmental kinds of things. When, you know, your water and sewer lines that are all under our major cities are becoming more deteriorated, how can we make sure that we can assist in upgrading those to the capacity that they need to be? And again, where are we getting the cash for all of these things? So a lot of you know, I was a former chairman of my state's traffic safety commission. I'm gonna at least I know a lot of us on our committee and me as well are really looking at incorporating some things in our transportation bill that are helpful for saving lives. For instance, graduated driver's licensing for our young people. Michigan was one of the third. I think we were the third to do that in our nation. I tell you, these kids really didn't know how to drive very well. All of a sudden, they have to spend a lot of drive time with their parents and guardians. The death and accident rate for teenagers is just gone down like this. And
Wow.
So these kinds of things, you might not think about it in a transportation bill, but it saves lives and sort of changes the way our kids are getting used to driving, all of that.
I don't know if you have had the chance as a committee to even look at this, or if you think it's even worth considering, but I've been interested in watching Governor Bob McDonnell's efforts in Virginia, where confronting these very same kinds of problems, that is increased fuel efficiency, more unconventional or vehicles on the road that don't pay gasoline tax, you know, they moved to a state sales tax. They did it in a revenue neutral way. They basically eliminated the gasoline tax altogether and had a 0.8%, and it replaced the same amount of revenue. So they didn't increase anybody's net taxes, but in the future we all know that will grow and not be subject to you know, the efficiencies which we're happy to achieve. And it's, you know, number one, I like it because it's the classic constitutional model of using the state as a laboratory to actually try something out. And he's been both praised and criticized for this. Has Congress looked at this? Have you guys begun to take testimony and think about you know, some sort of different broad-based tax like that would replace the gasoline tax altogether?
I like you. I like the idea of what has happened there with Governor McDonnell. And you know, one of the things that there was a lot of talk about, but I don't know how you'd ever do it, and I had great hesitancy on it, but I do believe the users should pay, right? The users should pay. In the sales tax model, the users are paying. But there was a lot of talk about vehicle miles driven. So you would pay depending on how many miles your vehicle drove. Well, the problem with that is, who's going to be tallying up how many miles you drove, right?
That's right.
I mean, I looked at that and went, well, the concept of it sounds great. The actual application of that could talk about Big Brother. So we all went, wait a minute.
The privacy involved.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of people, you know, and something people don't think about. You know, a lot of gasoline consumption is, you know, on farm vehicles. We don't tax that in Oklahoma. And if you're, you know, moving around, but let's say it's in your pickup, because sometimes you would be on the road, sometimes you wouldn't, you'd be taxed all the time, even when you were engaged in productive activity that we generally don't charge for. So I'm like you. I think the privacy and the personal issues there, that's enough.
That's enough, that's right.
But this other idea of finding a way, because I do think everybody benefits from a good transportation system, not even just the users. We all have the products we consume brought to us over the roads. We all, you know, have if you're, you know, in any activity in life at all, a good infrastructure around you is helpful in some direct or indirect way. So, but anyway, that's one of the great challenges. I'm glad it's in your capable hands, not in mine.
Well, we have a great committee there, and you know, it's interesting. Sometimes people think about Congress, and one of the best things that I have found with this job is just meeting all the people. Yeah. Right? All the various members of Congress, and we are just such a reflection of the country in so many ways, but everybody's got a story. How did they get here, right? And where did they come from? And now they're on this, you know, whether it's transportation or you're on the appropriations, and various interests that people have, a passion that they have for various subjects. And I know sometimes people hear sort of bad stories about members of Congress, but I'll tell you what, that really, for the most part, people come here with a passion and a commitment, I think, to try to make things better and to get things done. And you know, you hear the bad stories, but you hear the bad stories about whatever it is. There's always a couple, right?
Yep.
But there are so many people here that really want to make things happen, and I'm sort of cautiously optimistic that in the 113th Congress, which we are in right now, that we have an opportunity to have a positive impact in all of these various areas. Sometimes don't get a lot of media coverage, but have an impact on people's lives.
Absolutely true. Well, let me ask you about one of those areas. We don't have a lot of time left, but you know, what's consuming us right now, obviously, is, and you've touched on this earlier, is the fiscal crisis that we're going through. We all know that government's too big, spends too much, and we all know we've got an entitlement problem. We've got all sorts of issues that are coming together, and I'm like you. I sense that there's an opening here in the next few months to do something big, but it will, you know, by definition, be controversial.
Very.
And you know, honestly, you and perhaps me, but certainly, I think you would be one of those people that, if people think there's a solution to be had, you know, Candice Miller would be the kind of a person that you would have to have on board. Because if we can't get you, they're certainly not going to get, you know, because you're practical and pragmatic as an administrator, then they're not likely to be able to assemble 218 votes. So where do you think we're at in this discussion? Where do you think we're going? What do you think the possibilities are of some sort of major agreement between the two parties, and obviously involving the President and the Senate, both of which are Democrat, the House, which is Republican?
I feel the way you do. I think perhaps there's about a, I don't know, 6 to 9 month window here where something could really get done this year if people of goodwill on both sides try to think about really a big deal, the sort of the grand bargain they talk about. I mean, a big part of that for most of us, I think, would be comprehensive tax reform. You know, somebody told me the other day that, you know, the tax code is longer than the Bible without any of the good news, right? I mean,
That's a great line.
It's evolved.
I'm going to steal that.
It's evolved over the years. But I mean, can we make it flatter and fairer, right? And so that the average person could actually fill out their own income tax report, and the corporate tax rate. This is an area the president even agrees we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. And how can we make ourselves globally position ourselves better? That is a component of it. Having some sort of reforms to the real drivers of the economic problems that we have, and at the same time keeping that sacred trust that we have with our senior citizens. That has to be a component of it. And certainly just getting a handle on out of control government spending. And you know, when the president talks about revenues, on our side of the aisle, we're not interested in new revenues. Although I think if you were closing some tax loopholes with the tax reform, some of those areas we could be practical about if we were getting, you know, trillions of dollars of deficit reduction. So I think there is a window here, and hopefully we'll be able to get to that. I don't think I'm being Pollyannish about it, but practically I think it could happen.
It could, but it really will require presidential leadership. This is not something that I think you can have the Speaker Boehner and Majority Leader Reid sit in the back room and draw up. I mean, this president, and I hope this new charm offensive or opening to the Hill or whatever we want to call it is an indication the president is going to undertake something like that. I got to tell you, I didn't see it in the inaugural address or in the State of the Union.
No, but then I think as the thing has unfolded, where he thought maybe the Republicans were going to cave on various issues, and we have not. Look, the president is there. The Democratic Senate is there for at least another 2 years. The Republican House is here, and so we've all been gnashing our teeth. We've gnashed them down to the nubs, okay? So now, look, we're all in the room here. Let's try to get something accomplished. The president wants to have a legacy. That's fine. I don't care. Let's just try to get it going here, because, you know, something good can happen. Our economy could zoom, really.
Well, on that optimistic note, a grand bargain and a zooming economy will end. But I know our listeners and viewers, just by listening to you, understand why I value you so much and what a tremendous member of Congress you are. And it is a joy and a delight, my friend, to get to serve with someone like you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being on the show.
I feel the same way about you, Tom. You're a real value add to the Congress.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.
I think we're done.